Okay, welcome back to the Elokus channel. Okay, we've been off for a while, and now let's get right back into it and stick to it. It's been I just had was holiday of Pesach and Passover, and before that I traveled once and twice, and then I traveled now a week later, so I couldn't. It was very hard to get going during the traveling. So now that I'm here, hopefully for a while, unless Mashiach comes today, which we're all going to go to Yerushalayim, and then we're all going to be privy to the great grand Torah of Mashiach. Meanwhile, we're holding over here chapter 22. This is going to be the sixth class in the book, in the Mimer Kol Machlokes, which is the sixth discourse in the great book B'Shosh Akdimu 5672. And we're beginning right now, chapter 22. It's been a while since the last class, so for those of you who are with us, hopefully there's a whole lot of you with us, I would recommend, and this is what I had to do. I had to re-listen. I didn't listen to the whole thing, but had to refresh my memory by listening to the last class, which is class number 5, so that I can catch up kind of where we're holding, and we're ready to jump in to chapter 22, and this is going to be the first class in chapter 22 on Daf Lamed Hey in this copy that I'm using over here from B'Shosh Akdimu Tafresh Ayin Beis, and here we are. Okay, so the last ideas that we were learning was that the 10 hidden spheres that are in the Orein Sof, in the 10 hidden attributes that are in the Orein Sof before the Tzimtzum, as we discussed, even though we call them 10 spheros, they really are not in a state of Metzius, they're not in a state of existence. They are in a state of complete pshitus, and that's why it's very hard to understand even how we can even give them a name spheres. Yet, it's unlike the Pirush of the Ramak, who learns that the Sphirot, the Orein Sof is Pashut completely, and the Esses and the 10 Spheros of the Orein Sof are only related to the Kalim, only to the vessels. We're accepting the teaching of the Arizal, who learns that the Spheros are related to the Or as well. That even the Or, even in the Orein Sof, has already somewhat of a designation. However, as we learned in the last chapter, that since in Or in general is a revelation of the source, it's meant to present the source, and since the source over here is God himself, who doesn't have any definitions, so definitely the light that comes to represent him and is davuk in him, it's attached to him and expresses him and reveals him, has to have the basic feature of God, of the Orein Sof, of the Ein Sof. The Orein Sof is a revelation of the Ein Sof, himself, that he is Pashut and doesn't have any definitions, because if it had definitions, that would limit him. All right? So the Or doesn't have any definitions. If so, how can we then, why are we even attributing any spheres there? And the answer is that since when God was shining this light, remember we learned this is the second stage in the Orein Sof, that when Hashem is shining this light, it's like phase 2 within the Orein Sof, in which he is intending an audience, he's intending a recipient, because he's intending it for it to be received in worlds, in limited beings. That itself kind of predisposes this light to have 10 features. Although the features are so not in a state of existence, therefore all the spheres are in absolute oneness with each other. The Chesed and the Gevura are one, even though they're real opposites. But while it exists in the Essa spheres Agnuzos, it is one. All 10 of them are one, because there's no tzior, there's no image, there's no coloring yet. Yet at the same time, it's the designation. That's what we learned. It's, in other words, in essence, b'muhus, in substance, the spheres are pashut. The 10 hidden spheres that are in the Orein Sof are simple. But since Hashem is intending that he wants the Orein Sof to be received in the world, that designation designates it to say there are 10 potentials there, as opposed to infinite potentials, like spheres ein kates, which is a step before he's designating it to worlds. When he's just shining light, now he's shining light with an interest for it to be received in the world, that kind of stirs up these particular 10, but they're in such a non-stated state that they're all actually one. However, if you go back to many classes ago and many chapters ago, all of this was the point that we were now going to explain. When this is coming, you can see, as we're now going to see, to reconnect to something we learned a while ago, is to the concept that he brought from the Arizal, in which he said that the question that the Eitz Chaim poses, that there could have hypothetically been a possibility that the Kav would emanate directly from the Or Ein Sof without Tzimtzum. And the Eitz Chaim says, why did God have to, what's it called again, have a Tzimtzum on the Or, a contraction on the light, and remove it completely, and then reintroduce a Kav? He could have just removed the Or Ein Sof element of the Or Ein Sof and left a Kav. Why did he have to first go down to zero and then bring us back to a little ray? He could have, from the very get-go, left over the ray. So he asked in the discourse, or earlier we learned, how would that be even possible? Or Ein Sof is Or Ein Sof. It shouldn't. I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but it shouldn't make any sense. So the answer to that was, now that we understand that in the Or Ein Sof there is a nether level of the Or Ein Sof, and it means the Or Ein Sof, when it's already, there is a 10 hidden spheroids in the Or Ein Sof, and yet these 10 hidden spheroids, since it's before the Tzimtzum, are still called Or Ein Sof. It is from this dimension of the Or Ein Sof where the Eitz Chaim was posing its question. That means, if not for the concept of 10 hidden spheres from the Or Ein Sof, from the infinite light, if we would say the infinite light is purely Ein Sof, Ein Sof, Ein Sof, without any predisposition to predisposed to particular 10 spheros or so on, then it wouldn't be possible. Of course, we would need the tzimtzum, not just for the kelim, we would need the tzimtzum for the light as well. Anything after the tzimtzum, anything related to the worlds would need the tzimtzum. However, since the Or Ein Sof has already 10 spheros, albeit, as we explained in the last chapter, that these 10 spheres are so benign, so much so that they all exist as one, and you don't see any spheres at all, and that the light is pashut, but still there is already, whatever it is, a potential of 10 that is now kind of beneath the surface. There is a potential of 10. Now we understand why the Eitz Chaim can present, why the Arizal can present the hypothesis that they shouldn't need to have a tzimtzum. You should just be able to get to the, and for that the answer is you need the tzimtzum for the kelim. That's right. For the Or, it would have been enough to reduce. Now, in actuality, he says, I should remind you what was something we learned a while ago. In actually, the tzimtzum affects the Or Ein Sof, the tzimtzum arishon, the great grand tzimtzum arishon, affects the Or Ein Sof in two ways. Regarding the Or Ein Sof itself, that is above the 10 spheros agnuzos, the Or Ein Sof stage 1, Or Ein Sof A, like we discussed earlier, which is the Or Ein Sof just shining light, not in any way thinking about a creation, and therefore there's no potential of 10 in that light. And that, when it was needed to be pushed away in order for the lights and the kalim to emerge for after the tzimtzum, it needed to be removed completely. That's tzimtzum arishon. It's called b'derech siluk, in a way of removal. Removal, that we remove it to zero. There's nothing left of it. However, regarding the esa spheres agnuzos, the second dimension of the Or Ein Sof, where it's esa spheres agnuzos, for there, the tzimtzum doesn't actually remove it completely. It affects it, but it affects it in a manner of miyut. Miyut meaning it diminishes it. It diminishes it. And that is because in as much as we, and this is what he's coming to explain now in chapter 22 and mainly in chapter 23. It's going to be really beautiful. Is that he's going to explain how from the second level of Or Ein Sof, where the Or Ein Sof has somewhat, because, again, we're going to insist that the light and essence is still simple and it doesn't have any features and so on and so forth. But yet, it is in such a stage that 10 sfirot will come from it and not more. That itself, that stage of Or Ein Sof, although right now, as we're going to learn in this current chapter 22, it is not ready in any way to become the beginning of an energy for the world. You might think that even though we can't detect and we can't smell and you can't taste and if you would do a scan in the Or Ein Sof, you wouldn't find these 10 spheres because they're so hidden. So much so that they're all actually one. All 10 are one. So you wouldn't find them. And all right. Yet in this state, it's precisely because of this, he's going to explain in chapter 22. If they were to be released into the worlds as they are, in other words, if this is where beginning Bereshis would start, creation would start with the Esa Spheres Agnuzos, with the 10 hidden spheres, Bereshis, meaning the Genesis of existence would start in this stage, creation would never evolve. Because the worlds cannot tolerate this light, as he's going to explain now. And therefore, you need a tzimtzum. But the tzimtzum that was needed over here is not the same kind of tzimtzum that we need regarding the Or Ein Sof when it's not in a state of the Or Ein Sof that is above the 10 spheres agnuzos. Over there, you needed complete tzimtzum. Here, you need only tzimtzum b'derech miut, which means you need to take the same substance and minimize it. Lower the pixels. Lower, and minimize it. And then you'll get something that you can start working as the building blocks of creation. Now, to understand this idea, how on the one hand, it's still Or Ein Sof, and it's completely, utterly intolerable to the world. And yet, by minimizing it, it could work. It could start being the building, the underlying energies of creation. It's the source for the actual sphirot, for the lights that become the powerful energies of creation. To understand how that works, and it should make sense to us. So join me now for the next 2 chapters, which is probably, probably the next 10 classes. So let's go. Now, behold, on this level, as they exist, we learned in last class that not only are they themselves, the Or, in such a lofty state, in such an undesigned state yet, because the Or is a reflection, because the light is a reflection of the source, but it's even more than that. The light is still inside the source. Before the Tzimtzum, the Or Ein Sof is still included in the Ein Sof itself. So in that state, as they exist inside him, it's impossible for them, even if you're speaking already of 10, and therefore we've already dropped dramatically from the Or Ein Sof that's higher. Still, it's not possible for it to be drawn into the world. Hold on one second. In this state, it's not possible for it to be drawn into the worlds. And that is because the worlds, even the highest world, is not able to receive or pashut kazeh, cannot receive such a simple light. Even the most abstract world, even the most limitless world, since it's a world, that means it has hakbala, it has limitation. It cannot receive a light when it is in the state, because this light is really limitless. It has no hagbala, no limitation. Notwithstanding that it's already Eses Spheres Hagnuzais, but it's still limitless. So that's number one, because the spheres on this state are still mamish, literally, or Ein Sof. And the other reason why the worlds can't, and then the worlds therefore could not tolerate it. And another reason why it couldn't be that the or as it is, again, he's coming to explain now why even this light, the second level of Or Ein Sof, why we needed Tzimtzum, and what's the effect of Tzimtzum on this light. So one reason is because the light is still too pashut, and if it's too pashut, no world can perceive and experience and integrate and such light. And another reason, if the 10 hidden spheres would be downloaded, in other words, if they would be drawn forth, in the quality, in the state of existence as they exist in the Or Ein Sof, if these powers would be released to the creations as they exist in the Or Ein Sof, from before the Tzimtzum, kulam yachad, they would all come together. And it doesn't mean that you would have just one, not 10. No, we would have 10. Because if they would draw out, they would come forth, and they would come forth 10 lights. But there wouldn't be an order of first and last, and therefore there wouldn't be higher and lower. One of the primary important aspects of creation is that there is an evolution, and things in which this evolution creates a chain of what is higher in creation and what is lower in creation. Higher meaning more divine, more less limited, and more conscious, a higher consciousness of the Ein Sof, and lower meaning a lesser consciousness. The light gets dimmed and diminished. So there's a whole system. We know there's a system of evolution of 4 worlds: Atzilus, Bria, Tzir, and Asiya. And then in the spheres itself, there is an order. Chachma is the highest sphere, the most light shining in Chachma. Bina is a little less, or a lot less, and so on and so forth. And in general, the intellect, the 10 spheres are intellect and emotion. Intellect comes before emotion. And Chagas, which is Chesed, Gevurah, Teferes, which are the primary emotions, come before the more practical emotions. There is a system where things come first and Tzim comes later. In this state, these spheres, as they are in a state of Gnuzais, if they would come forth in their current state, they all present themselves together. That means there is no superiority of one, that it should be considered higher than the other, because they're all the malchut of that world is in the same quality and on the same attachment to the Ein Sof itself, like the chachma of that world, and therefore there wouldn't create the gradations and the levels that there are within creation. And he gives an example to that. This idea that if it would come, like, do we like, it's 10 powers, and don't we say that these 10 powers, they're inherently systemized, that one comes from the other? Emotions, for instance, are a product of intellect. Can never be excited about something before you know about it. First, you have the knowledge, you have the information, you can get excited. That's the way it works. So what are we saying now? That if they would be released on the level of these spheres as they exist in God, they would come directly out, then there wouldn't be any first and second. That means the intellect wouldn't come before the emotions. What does that mean? Of course it has to. Can't have any. The emotions are a byproduct of the intellect. So he says, no, he's going to give an example, that they all emerge together. Like the secret powers of the soul, they all come forth together. What does that mean? When we experience our powers of our soul, the 10 spheres above have we were built in the image of God. So our experiences tell us about the divine, the experience of the divine. So we find that in our experience, there is the usual revelation and evolution of our own powers, the experience as we experience them, and that is through a filter, where the essential powers of our soul are go through a powerful reduction before they emerge into our consciousness. That reduction, whatever that is, which kind of dramatically de-energize and descales, tones down the powers, also produces, and let's call it this filter, which is our pre-consciousness that filters our essential powers of our soul. When that, one of the features, number one, is that it acclimates these energies to be tolerable by the body. Because if these powers would come gushing forth as it is, we can blow fuses. It wouldn't be good, and we can really be lunatics. And a lot of times, people that are a little interesting are actually people who have problems with these filters, where the filter is not filtering the powers, and the powers are emerging with intensity that is like too much, right? But that's number one. Number two, the filter creates an order. It sets the stage, and it says, like on a show, who steps up and does the opening act, who does the follow act, and who does the grand finale. It kind of doesn't let everybody on. The filter is what keeps the powers in check, allowing each one to emerge when it's supposed to, and setting up an order where it's not only that it's not giving permission, that it's set up in a way where one is born from the other, and one is a derivative from the other. But this is all coming from the filter. This is not in the essential powers. How do we see so? Because there are unique circumstances when those filters are, I'm not going to say completely removed, but to a very great degree, the filter is cast aside. And the powers of the soul emerge as they are. And then we see, number one, they're super intense, super powerful, and also that they all step on stage together. And there's no one before. In other words, they all flood our consciousness equally. And there's no hierarchy of an order of first and second. And this is going to serve as the example for the way it is by God as well. The filter that we're talking about is the tzimtzum. If there is no filter and things emerge straight out, as they are, they would drop right into the worlds, then number one, they would be too intense. The worlds couldn't handle them. Number two, it would be lacking that order, which is so important in creation. And now, where do we find this idea that where can we see within ourselves a unfiltered emergence of our powers in which we say that they all step on equally? He's going to say that when a person has there's a rule called simcha pirates together. Joy breaks the boundaries. And when a person has immense joy, the joy kind of, and especially if it's something very deep in your life, he talks about a lot about the marriage of a child, especially if it's a one and only child. Didn't have children for a long time, finally had a child. That child is getting married. There's no greater joy. And that joy breaks the norms, and allows, and suddenly the power, the consciousness is flooded with this inner joy. And as a result of that, during the wedding, during that time, a person can experience a whole spectrum of powers of their own soul in a non-orderly manner. And again, it's not disturbing at that time. It's actually an incredible experience. But it's not meant to be that way in regular circumstances. Okay, do as it is known, as he explains. The revealed powers, the manner in which they step forth when they're drawn, comes out in an order and in a step-by-step. There is who's first and who's next. The tchila, for example, in the order of the intellect and the emotions. First, the intelligence comes forth. This is when we are operating with a filter. This is normal operations. So first, we begin all of our conscious experiences by first engaging the mind. That's how we get to know of our surroundings. We get to know of things that we ought to get excited to pursue, good things and bad things or whatever it is. It's all because we have our mind it's the intelligence. So first is Amshachas HaMoichin, in our relationship with Hashem. First, we need to study and learn, and then we can process that information and excite the heart. As it says in the Pasuk, V'yadaita Yom, you should know today. First, you know in your head. Then then you should take it to your heart, which means to trigger the emotions based on the knowledge. And that's why we learned many times that the intellect are called parents and the emotions are called children. You can't have a child before the parent. The very definition of a child is the child is a derivative from the parent. The parent are the cause and the child is the effect. You can't have an effect before the cause. So usually the tchila first from Shachas HaMoichin. First comes forth the intelligence. Then comes the emotions. The E actually says Galas Hamidos. It's not possible to have the revelation of the emotions beli kedimas HaMoichin if the mochin did not precede. First, the mochin have to come first, and then there could be the midos. And that is when b'midos shal pitam b'das. That is when the midos are working al pitam b'das, meaning the emotions are controlled emotions that are born out of the intellect. These types of emotions cannot come forth. First, there needs to be a study, an understanding, a grasping, and then there can be the emotion. And even more so. The one performer needs to get off the stage for the other one to come on. Not only does one bring on the other, not only does the intellect bring on the emotions to be like the harmony, but that the emotions can't even go to the microphone and start doing their song and singing they can't do their act until the previous performer left the stage. Like we find that while a person when a person is deeply in a meditative state, thinking about something deeply or understanding something, and the real depth of the idea is shining in their head, then they're silent, they're calm. Excitement becomes after they kind of disconnect from it, but they don't disconnect completely. They disconnect from the internal understanding of it, and they summarize it. They come to a summary and they say, wow, this is awesome. See, while they're in it, they're not thinking it's awesome. They're just blown away by it. So they're inside of it. They're not thinking about it. Then after it's time, now they conceived it and understood it, the mind does a summary. It concludes. It comes to a conclusion. Its conclusion is, God is awesome. Or this element of Hashem is like, wow, or whatever it is. This technology is crazy. I want to have this technology in my life. But that has to come after you summarize. And only then does the excitement emerge. And only after the lights of the intelligence departs, then the emotions can be born. The Be'ez is Galus HaMoichin at the time when the mind is in its full revelation. Says Galus HaMidos. You cannot have a revelation of the emotions. So two things. Number one, intellect comes before the emotions. Secondly, the intellect needs to depart for the emotions to fill the consciousness. But this is all when we are filtered. However, when we experience an unfiltered moment, however, when the powers of the soul, which are the powers of intellect and emotion, come forth as they are in the soul itself, not through the pre-conscious reduction filter, and that filter is removed, then we find that there's no order. It's not so. The Be'ez is Galus or Amoichin. At the same time that the light of the intelligence is shining, while the mind is experiencing lightning, literally, of ideas that are flashing, like deep understanding of concepts. At the very same time, the person can be jumping up and down, singing and dancing by the wedding, and their mind can be conceiving the greatest ideas. So the heart, the joy is explosive, the excitement is there, and at the very same time. Why? Because it's the soul itself that opened up in the person. Usually the soul projects kind of from a distance. It's like its energy that it's putting in the body is a a ray of the soul, so to speak. But at a time of great joy, the Pnimius floods open, the dam breaks, the soul itself floods. And when the soul comes, it comes in with all its powers. And in the soul itself, all the powers are equal. F Shaliyah, he says, at this very time of the Isgalus, or Amoichan, actually, he says, Galus Amidus, there can be the revelation of the emotions. At the time of joy, Shem is Galim, Koichas and that the internal powers are revealed. Ein is Galusam B'Sei Devadraga. They do not come forth in a very orderly, controlled manner, b'ktim of ichru, one for first and the other one later, but rather the be'es is galus hamoichin, at the very same time that the mochin is the mochin, which is the intelligence, is revealed. Yachalis is galus hamidos. There can be the emotion, the revelation of the emotions. V'oira moichin is galam az b'yoser. And the light of the emotion of the intellect, while the midos, while the excitement, while the person is literally dancing and singing, that means they're obviously in a very excited, emotional state. At that very same time, their mind can be filled with deep ideas. It says a lot of times that ideas that you've never understood all your life, at the time of when you're very joyous and you're very happy, it's like boom, you have these like breakthroughs. Like we see it literally, the time of great joy, a person can conceive very, very lofty things that they usually can't reach. Many things that the person never understood, and he didn't really grasp it. At the time of the joy, you come. So first of all, what do you see? Why is it that in the time of the joy you will understand things you generally didn't understand? Because you're now privy to your essence of your intellect, not just to the outer lights of your intellect. Because the kochos are now being revealed from the etzem. And the reason for that is because the soul itself is now in a state of openness in the person. It's because at that time, the pnimius and the innermost and the essence of the light of the intellect is now being present and shining. It's not only an external part of the intelligence. Now you would think that because if this is the case, and we would say a kal v'chomer, which means like this, if in a case where I'm experiencing just an external ray of my intellect, there is no space and no room for anything other than my intellect for emotion. How much more so when I'm experiencing the essence of the intellect, there shouldn't be space for the emotion. But he says, no, literally at that moment, person can experience very deep love to people around them. The emotions can be very strong. First of all, the emotions can be the excitement about what you're thinking, and it can be other emotions as well. There can be an array, a whole rainbow of experiences, intellect and emotions. They too are in the intensity of revelation. And they do not disturb the calmness that is usually needed for the mind to operate. And the reason is, and that is because all order goes away, because the essential powers, when the powers that are hidden in the soul, they're not set up in an order. It's not intellect and then emotion. Intellect is directly plugged into the essence, to the soul, and emotions are also directly plugged into the soul. Emotions are not a product, are not a baby from the intellect in the essence. It's only in their post-filtered state, one is born from the other. All of them receive and are drawn directly from the essence of the soul. They have no order. They're all drawn as one. And this is going to serve as the example for why the worlds cannot receive the Esses Spheres Hagnuzos all in one. Be'ez Hashem in next class. Meanwhile, let Mashiach be here today.